is Audible.
Not a Nation of Immigrants. Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, and a History of Erasure and Exclusion by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Narrated by Sean Taylor Corbett. Introduction. On George Washington's birthday, 2018, the Trump administration's Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, L. Francis Cisna, changed the agency's official mission statement, dropping the language of a nation of immigrants to describe the United States. The previous mission statement had said the agency secures America's promise as a nation of immigrants by providing accurate and useful information to our customers, granting immigration and citizenship benefits, promoting an awareness and understanding of citizenship, and ensuring the integrity of our immigration system. The revised mission statement read, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services administers the nation's lawful immigration system, safeguarding its integrity and promise by efficiently and fairly adjudicating requests for immigration benefits while protecting Americans, securing the homeland, and honoring our values. The Trump administration's official negation of the U.S. as a nation of immigrants was unlikely to change the liberal rhetoric. During Joe Biden's 2020 bid for the presidency, the campaign issued a statement on his immigration plan, titled, The Biden Plan for Securing Our Values as a Nation of Immigrants, asserting that, unless your ancestors were native to these shores, or forcibly enslaved and brought here as part of our original sin as a nation, most Americans can trace their family history back to a choice to leave behind everything that was familiar in search of new opportunities and a new life. Unlike the previous Nation of Immigrants statement, the Biden campaigns did acknowledge prior and continuing Native presence, as well as specifying that enslaved Africans were not immigrants. However, the new rhetoric continues to mask the settler colonial violence that established and maintained the United States and turns immigrants into settlers. It appears ironic that Donald Trump positioned himself as anti-immigrant, being the son of an immigrant mother from Scotland and the grandson of an immigrant paternal grandfather from Germany, as well as being married to an immigrant from Slovenia. But Trump was not against European immigrants. In a January 2018 staff meeting on temporary immigration status, Trump asked, "Why do we need more Haitians? Take them out. Why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here? Why do we want all these people from Africa here? They're shithole countries. We should have more people from Norway." The month before, referring again to Haitians, Trump said that they all have AIDS. And about Nigerians, he said that once they had seen the United States, they would never go back to their huts in Africa. In his quest for the presidency, Trump made immigration the center of his campaign, focusing on the exclusion of Mexicans, promising to build a border wall and militarize the southern border. He claimed, "The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems," and railed, "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people, but I speak to border guards." Democratic Party politicians and liberals in general insisted that Trump and his supporters were un-American in denying the Nation of Immigrants ideology that has been a consensus for more than a half-century and remains a basic principle of the Democratic Party. Most people around the world viewed the U.S. as a nation of immigrants, while questioning if the U.S. was backsliding on its promise in electing Trump. With the Democratic Party back in power in 2021, the Nation of Immigrants rhetoric appears to be firmly back in place, although the exclusionary policies of the U.S. will continue as they did during the Obama administration. As Osha Gray Davidson, who has collected dozens of examples of how the phrase is used, points out, Nation of Immigrants is generally used to counter xenophobic fears. But the ideology behind the phrase also works to erase the scourge of settler colonialism and the lives of indigenous peoples. "We in America are immigrants, or the children of immigrants," is the refrain. The theme of Mitt Romney's acceptance speech as the Republican nominee for president in 2012 included, "A Nation of Immigrants." Optimism is uniquely American. It is what brought us to America. We are a nation of immigrants. Speaking at a Nevada high school to a large audience, President Barack Obama said, "We are a nation of immigrants, and that means we are constantly being replenished with fighters who believed in the American dream, and it gives us a tremendous advantage over other nations." Presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, in 2016, evoked a nation of immigrants with, "The Statue of Liberty reminding us of who we are and where we came from. We are a nation of immigrants, and I am proud of it." A Nation of Immigrants was a mid-20th century revisionist origin story. The United States emerged from World War II undamaged by bombs and heavy population loss, which was the experience of most of the combatant nations. In fact, the United States became a beefed-up industrial powerhouse exhibiting military might, including the atomic bomb. It was poised to become the economic, military, and moral leader of the free world. The country that actually defeated the army of the Third Reich, the Soviet Union, was the new adversary. U.S. post-war administrations scrambled to conceal any trace of the United States' colonialist roots, system of slavery, and continued segregation as they developed military and counterinsurgent strategies to quell national liberation movements in former European colonies. The Soviet Union and Communist China, which took power in 1949, denounced Western imperialism and colonialism in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. In 1958, then U.S. Senator John F. Kennedy, surely informed by liberal historian Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., published the influential and best-selling book, A Nation of Immigrants, which advanced the notion that the United States should be understood or defined through the diversity of the immigrants it had welcomed since independence. This thesis was embraced by U.S. historians and found its way into textbooks and school curriculums. It is neither coincidental nor surprising that Kennedy would introduce this idea as, at the time, he was strategizing how to become the first president born of immigrants, albeit very wealthy ones, and the first Catholic president in a Protestant-dominated culture. Aspiring to the presidency, Kennedy introduced a clear context and narrative in which he could transform this negative into a positive. This founding text of A Nation of Immigrants was published during Kennedy's 1954 to 1960 first term as U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, 2 years before he was elected president. Given that in the 21st century, immigration is practically synonymous with the Mexico-U.S. border that was established in 1848, it is striking that Kennedy never mentioned Mexico or Mexicans or the U.S.-Mexico border in the text, nor did he use the terms Latino or Hispanic. Yet, this was 1958, late in the period of the contract labor Bracero program, which began during World War II. A total of 2 million Mexican citizens, with the participation of the Mexican government, migrated to the United States, particularly California, as de facto indentured agricultural workers under time-limited contracts. Meanwhile, the burgeoning agribusiness industry in California recruited even more Mexican workers outside the program, without documentation or civil rights, and subject to deportation. More egregious than Kennedy's omission of any mention of Mexico or the border is that the federal program known by its offensive official name, Operation Wetback, began during Kennedy's first year as senator and continued beyond his senatorial career through his presidency. Operation Wetback began in 1954 to round up and deport more than 1 million Mexican migrant workers, mainly in California and Texas, in the process subjecting millions, many who were actually U.S. citizens, to illegal search and detention and deportation, forcing them to forfeit their property. Workers were deported by air and trains and ships far from the border, leaving those who were U.S. citizens stranded and without the documents enabling them to return to their homes in the United States. Operation Wetback was a repeat of the Hoover administration's deportation of 1 million Mexicans in the 1930s, dubbed Mexican repatriation. Regarding the status of indigenous peoples in Kennedy's Nation of Immigrants scheme, the then senator wrote, "Another way of indicating the importance of immigration to America is to point out that every American who ever lived, with the exception of one group, was either an immigrant himself or a descendant of immigrants. The exception, Kennedy went on, was Will Rogers, part Cherokee Indian, who said that his ancestors were at the docks to meet the Mayflower. But Kennedy disagreed, claiming that some anthropologists believe that the Indians themselves were immigrants from another continent who displaced the original settlers, the Aborigines. This is the bogus speculation of U.S. white nationalists, who claim that those imagined original Aborigines were in fact European, possibly Irish. A few pages on in the text, in the only other mention of Native Americans, Kennedy refers to them as the first immigrants, while dismissing their presence as members of scattered tribes. Equally unsettling, Kennedy includes enslaved Africans as immigrants, although the book contains the infamous drawing of a slave ship, with humans chained down on their backs, scarcely an inch between each, packed like sardines. It is striking to read how profoundly Kennedy whitewashed history by noting that the immigration experience was not always pleasant, or that the Japanese and Chinese brought their gentle dreams to the West Coast. He failed to mention the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, or its extension a few years later to all Asians. This idea of the United States, introduction